if we could, is there anybody here on the Board of Licensure one? If there isn't, I'd like to skip to the second one, because I know we have something from that.
Oh, there is.
Okay, yep. The first one is the Board of Licensure for Professional Land Surveyors, and again, as legislators, I think know, we don't ask people to present their case, if you will, but we'll ask Beth to summarize the situation.
Sure. Behind tab 4 in your materials is a little matrix here of the kinds of information that we typically try to, at least initially, get together for you on a new request that's coming before you for consideration. And I will remind you that you do have, if we need to reference it, a particular written procedure about how to handle new requests, so we can go there if we need to. But there was a request that came in for an OPEGA review of the Board of Licensing for Professional Land Surveyors. That board is administratively connected to the Department of Professional and Financial Regulation. The requester does have a legislative sponsor, that's Representative Kumiega, who I believe is here. If you want to hear from him, his perspective on why he's willing to sponsor this request. I don't know how much you know about the Board of Professional Land Surveyors, but they're one of the boards that is authorized by statute, and that statute is given in the additional information column. Its role is to protect the public through regulation of the practice of land surveying in the state of Maine. There are currently 542 licensed professional surveyors and 99 surveyors in training. The board has 7 members appointed by the governor for 5-year terms. The board's makeup is established in statute, and it has 2 public members and 5 licensed professional land surveyors who are appointed to the board. The primary responsibilities of the board include setting licensing criteria for the profession, examining and licensing qualified applicants, hearing complaints against licensees, and taking disciplinary action when necessary. The administrative support for the board comes from the Office of Professional and Occupational Regulation that's within Professional and Financial Regulation Department. Over the past 6 years, the Board of Surveyors has averaged between 7 and 9 cases, complaint cases, that are opened and concluded annually. The purpose of the licensing system is to protect the public against dishonest or unethical practitioners or those who have fallen below a minimum of standards of competence in their practice of their profession, and violators are subject to disciplinary action that can range up to a revocation of a license. This request resulted from concerns the requester had, in which the legislator sponsor shares, and others that we've heard from also share, that the board does not take appropriate action up to and including revocation of licenses in response to complaints about violations of licensing requirements or professional standards. And the related concerns there are that the board may be biased in favor of land surveyors, because so many of them are a part of that profession, and that also there is little turnover in board members. So based on the concerns that would put forward in the request, OPEGA's recommendation here, should the committee want to task us with this review, would be to focus in under possible areas of focus. The focus of the review as we see it would be looking into the effectiveness of the board in addressing complaints that are filed against licensed surveyors. I will also just say, for the committee's reference, this is not the first board that OPEGA has received such concerns about over the years. It is the first one that the requesters have managed to get a legislative sponsor to bring it forward. So, but there is often a question about the effectiveness of any of these oversight boards when they are made up of members who are of the profession that they are overseeing. So this is not an atypical concern. I think there are some specific instances that occurred at the board. The board didn't take the kind of action we thought was, the requester thought was appropriate that led to this, but nonetheless it is not an atypical concern that we've heard about oversight boards. The only other information I have for you is that there's no general fund dollars or anything. These boards are self-supporting, and that they have dedicated revenue from the license fees of the folks who are licensed and overseen by the boards. And you have there in the column on rough dollar estimate what the actual expenditures were for the board in 2015, were a little over $96,000. So this is really not a financial issue, but we usually try to give you some sense of the magnitude of any kinds of dollars that might be involved with the organization that's subject to the request. And I'm happy to answer any questions. As I mentioned, Representative Kumiega is here and could give you his perspective on why he thinks this is an important topic for review, if you care to hear.
You've addressed our questions.
Yes, Representative Sirocki.
Thanks. I have a question about, I think that a lot of times they don't, maybe it hasn't gotten to this level because they use legislation, comes in front of my committee, and we get this kind of stuff, and I'm just wondering what you think about how long it would take and how much effort it would take to just, because I'm looking at the fact that there's little turnover in board members. I mean, I can look at this and say, yeah, that doesn't seem like it would be that hard to fix. And I don't know that we need this level of investigation to do that. And
Yeah.
is that how it's been addressed in the past, pretty much?
I don't believe the lack of turnover in board members to be the main issue in what I could imagine would be all of the factors one would consider in how effectively the board's carrying out that role. So it's just something additional that might be part of things.
So are you thinking that this would be an appropriate way to find out if in fact the board is operating in an effective way, and that's probably the only way that we'd be able to do it?
I could imagine OPEGA in this review taking a look at what complaints have come in, how the board has processed them, what the decisions have been like, what their process is for the complaints and that sort of thing, what their results usually are, and being able to present it. We wouldn't have much by way of comparison to other boards in terms of their enforcement. So unless we expanded it to include other boards, we'd be a little bit in isolation. But still, they're only doing 7 to 9 cases annually, so that's not a huge amount of cases that would need to be sort of looked at. I think it would be on a smaller scope. We could give you a read, probably.
Thank you. Representative Sanderson.
Thank you. I have a question, and perhaps Representative Mastracchio maybe already know the answer to this, but on these boards, after the final decision, what strikes me is Representative Kumiega's letter here saying that should the board fail to act, the landowner has no other option. Decisions of the licensing board are final. Is that consistent across most board disciplinary?
And I don't think that's exactly right. I think the option is an appeal through the court system.
Okay,
but
not through the board system.
Right, not through the board and not through the Department of Financial and Professional and Financial Regulation.
Okay.
So it's not like sometimes an administrative type appeal process like DHHS might have. It's through the court. Is my current understanding.
Okay. All right.
Senator
Thank
Burns.
you.
Thanks. No, sir?
I'm on that.
Yeah, Senator Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, do you happen to know what the statutory breakdown is? You said some person board.
Yes, yes, 2 public members and 5 licensed professional land surveyors, all of whom are appointed by the governor. I know that the commissioner of Department of Professional Financial Regulation told me that recently she's been working with the governor's office they have recently appointed a new member, I think, to this board. But,
Thank you. I think, Senator Dunn, go ahead.
Just a question, how many projects do we have on the way, in action right now, in process?
in process right now, we only have Riverview. We're finishing up the Goodwill
And
Hinckley.
Goodwill Hinckley, how many on deck?
The 2 next up for priority are the Division of Licensing and Regulatory Services for child care providers and the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority. Those are ones you wanted to give priority to next, but we also have State Lottery is currently on our schedule as in progress, although we're not working on it. DHHS auditing and Public Utilities Commission.
I just think we have such a load that right now, I mean, under normal circumstances, I think we would have time and maybe space to do it, but, I mean, I don't see us getting through that list for some time, so I'm not inclined to take on another project right now, and maybe we can find another way to get it done, but I don't think we have the time and the space.
I might just add, Senator, that I think there's going to be some discussion later in the agenda about the tax expenditure process that we're beginning to be engaged in, and whether we might want to move one of those expenditure reviews up to the front burner, i.e. new market tax credits. So there may be another.
Right, but that's a separate team. I've got a separate staff team working on those.
I withdraw my comment. Yes, Representative Sirocki.
Well, I guess before we say we can't do it, I just am curious how much time you would think that it would take to do this and staff time. And if we're talking about a relatively short, for me, it'd be like establishing a baseline of how boards operate. I mean, maybe we really learn something from it for the future for our other boards and how they operate. And I guess I'm just looking at it from that perspective, and it could solve a problem, because the issue is, even if you can resolve it in the court, and you have to spend more money to do that, you're still stuck as a landowner at what somebody did. So I don't understand. I mean, I don't know. I'm very conflicted about this, and I understand we have a lot on our agenda, but it just seems kind of important.
Can I ask a question? There are a number of professions, including this one, that have these boards that essentially oversee the profession and are responsible for discipline. We have one for attorneys, for instance, and doctors and dentists, and all sorts of other professions. So what I gather from reading this letter here is that there is a constituent who is complaining about a case which took place, which may or may not be indicative of some more system-wide problem with this board. I can tell you there are clients who complain about me too, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing a lousy job. I guess my question is, has this been are there more than one complaint about this board's operation?
We have heard from more than the one individual. I've also done a little bit of questioning around, and I do think there's a potential, I do think it's more in the realm of, is this potentially a systemic issue that we wouldn't really know for sure until we look at sort of the outcomes of some of these things, I guess you would say. But
I'm sorry, I don't understand your answer. We know
it's not, I don't view the questions that have been asked here as being based just on one person's problem with a decision that was made by the board. I do think there are some elements to this that suggest it could be a systemic problem.
Senator Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the past, we've set a precedent, I believe, I think it's an acceptable precedent for allowing the legislator to have a few words with us, even though we don't go into the general public and that type of things until we decide if there's going to be a review, and that review is done. But I would request that when Representative Kumiega is here, that we hear his perspective before we make any decision.
Is that acceptable to everybody? Representative, please come join us. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Senator. Chairman. I have a couple of constituents who are actually here, and just one point I want to make. They were told that there is no option for them to go and take this to court. If they had hired, it was a situation where I hire a surveyor, I have a complaint, I go to the board, and then since there's a contractual relationship between the two of us, I could take that person to court. But if in this situation was a neighbor who felt he was wrongfully, he was drawn into a court case because of a situation of some mistakes or incompetence on the part of a surveyor, because he doesn't have a contractual relationship with that person, he doesn't really have an option for taking it to court.
If I could ask a question, that may be, but that's got nothing to do with the licensing board. That would be solved by a statute that permitted a cause of action for a lawsuit.
True, but think what the issue that they brought to me is that the board isn't effective on, there would be no need for further action if the board was more effective in disciplining people who step over the line.
Questions of the representative? Thank you. Thanks for being here. Further discussion? Oh, excuse me, Senator Davis.
Just a question. I have a complaint against somebody that I've hired to do a survey. I go to the board. Does the board not have someone from the Attorney General's office to work with them and bring the thing to completion?
They are supported by an assistant attorney general is assigned to work with the board, yes.
Thank you.
Representative DeShane.
Thank you, Senator. I'm trying to grasp the actual nature of the problem. And it could go one of two ways. Either the board isn't properly set up, not the right people on it, not the right powers of oversight, whatever, in which case that's fixed by a bill that would go to LPRED. Or the board is properly constituted, but it doesn't do a good job because it's all a bunch of insiders who are protecting each other, and therefore good results aren't coming out of it. That could be revealed in an investigation we do. I'm not sure which of these two problems requires the fix.
I think the majority of the concerns in that we've heard are related to the second, as opposed to the above the board.
Further discussion? Does someone have any motion?
If I might,
Yes.
remind you that putting this directly on our work plan is not the only option this committee has as to what it might like to do with this, what action it might take on this request. Sometimes you determine that there's additional information, for example, that you'd like to have, and you ask us to go get that and bring it back before you make a determination. You can vote to put it on deck, where it's not officially on the work plan, but at least it's a statement of, we think this might be a useful review in the future. You can refer it to sometimes you refer the matter to a policy committee to take a look at and ask them to give a read back to you. Sometimes you ask for, could you let us know if you think this is a problem that's worth OPEGA reviewing? So those are other things that you can do that you've done in the past. So I just wanted to remind, since we haven't had very many new requests this year, voting to put it on the work plan is not the only potential option. And the procedure that has all the options listed, since we will be needing them for the other ones, I think probably too, is J, behind tab J in the back of your book. And it's page 2 of that document. Item number 10, there's options A through G for your consideration.
Thank you.
Are you wishing you took that one? The committee deciding either definitely to do one of those things today or to continue the discussion to another time would be what we normally are looking at. So those range from no further action at this time, referring the request to the Joint Standing Committee of Jurisdiction or someone else, something we call preliminary inquiry only at this time, which is where you might want additional background or information. For example, something I could think of that might help would be understanding what the results were of these 6, of the cases that have been there for the last 3 years. What have been the results in terms of the board's findings and any disciplinary actions that have been taken? It might give you a sense of assertiveness on the part of the board. I don't know, but that is an example of kinds of information we might ask them to provide that would be helpful to your decision. D is authorize OPEGA to conduct limited research and respond to the requester, where we think there might be minimal research or analysis that we could do that would answer the question for the legislative sponsor.
Senator Diamond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This could we ask the Committee of Substance to try to look at this sometime during the session? I'm trying to find a way to have it not just die. I mean, I can't vote to add something else to a list we already so filled with. So we could ask, and I know we have an expert from the Committee of Substance here, but could we at least consider that, Mr. Chairman, as a way to get Mr. Representative Kumiega? Yeah.
Yes, Representative Sirocki and then Representative Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to suggest that I think that if we just could have, I mean, it would be probably easier, and if we're going to need that information, whether you send it back to the other committee or not, but having that preliminary information about the results of the last 3 years, that wouldn't be, they only do 6 to 7 cases a year. I mean, and then at that point, you could refer it back to Alfred, and then that might be appropriate. I mean, I guess if that would be doable, I would prefer that rather than just fill it all together. And sending it back with no information at all. It would be much more helpful to have something to start with.
Representative Sanderson and then Representative Campbell.
Thank you. I agree with Representative Sirocki. Until we actually burden another committee or actually vote to, yes, put this on our work plan and on top of everything else that we have, I think option 10C, the preliminary inquiry only at this time, will give us the information we need to decide, do we, yes, need to go forward with this because, as the director is indicating, there may be a systemic problem, or is that what it appears to be, yet it's not at this time. So I would make the motion that we ask the director and her staff to do a preliminary inquiry at this time.
Yeah.
Moved and seconded. Is that, before we discuss it, is that a sufficiently detailed motion for you to?
Yes.
It is, okay. Discussion of the pending motion.
Yeah.
Senator Burns.
The obvious question, what is this going to set aside for you to do that?
Well, I mean, this isn't a full-blown review.
I know.
So this is something where, you know, I can ask staff to fit it in around other stuff that they're doing. So it won't slow down anything that we currently do.
Further discussion of the motion? Representative Campbell.
Yeah, I guess I've heard some complaints from the other side, the professional surveyors who are not happy with the board. So I think
We don't get much applause.
Or any.
No, that wasn't.
All right. Any further discussion of the motion? All in favor, please indicate. All. Sorry, could you hold your hands again? Sorry. All opposed, please indicate. It's 2 in the negative and the rest in the affirmative. Motion passes.
All right, we'll bring that back to either your next meeting or the meeting after.
Okay, the next, thank you. Thank you, Representative, for being here and constituents as well. The next agenda item, consideration of a review of Fund for Health in Maine.
We've had both of these requests for a while because of their workload on other things. The Fund for Healthy Maine, I think this has actually been publicized. The requester on this primarily was Representative Timberlake and I'm forgetting the other name. A couple of representatives in the House. I'm sorry.
Senator Mason.
Senator Mason, but
Sirocki.
I was going to say Heather. We're interested in this topic. I've met with them to kind of scope in on what it was that they were most concerned about, given that OPEGA did a review of the Fund for Healthy Maine back and released that report back in 2009. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that piece of work that we did or the information brief. Senator Burns says he is. But I just want to let you know that there are in the column past or current efforts in this area. The Health and you might somebody referenced that earlier today. The Health and Human Services Committee is just wrapping up a study of the allocations of a Fund for Healthy Maine. That study is a result of one of the recommendations from our 2009 report, that ongoing look. And I am aware of what the recommendations are, that preliminary ones that have been made by that study. As I mentioned, we had the study that we did. So with that in mind, I just want to say that what we have laid out here under the possible areas of focus for this review are not duplicative of anything that's been done, and in fact, I would view these questions as an extension of the work that we did in 2009. The place where we left off, this would be the next deeper dive, if you will, into how the Fund for Healthy Maine funds are spent. So those possible areas of focus are grantee, I'm going to call them grantees, the folks that get the money from the state, the Fund for Healthy Maine money. Grantees management and tracking of their Fund for Healthy Maine funds they receive to ensure those funds are actually spent on the intended purposes. How the grantees actually use the funds they receive, and then what do they specifically pay for, who's getting paid with those funds and for what purposes. The portion of those Fund for Healthy Maine funds that are going toward administrative type activities, whether at the state level or at the grantee level, versus actual services targeted to particular populations. For those of you that were around, you might recall we answered a similar question around that related to children's mental health back in, I don't know, 2010 maybe. But that kind of question is what this envisions. And lastly, the extent to which grantees are dependent on Fund for Healthy Maine funds to support their organizations. These, I think, are in alignment with what the requesters are most concerned about. They can correct me if I'm wrong. And as I mentioned, I don't think they're duplicative of work that's been going on by ourselves or others recently. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's $53 million in 2015 was the amount of Fund for Healthy Maine funds. That comes from the tobacco settlement monies and also from the amount of casino revenue that's been directed to go into the Fund for Healthy Maine. I think you're all familiar with the fact that the statute requires the funds to be used for 8 particular types of purposes. That's what the current study by Health and Human Services Committee was intended to do, is say, are the things we're spending it on aligned with those purposes or not? And there are a number of recommendations for our 2009 report that have been implemented, including making the Fund for Healthy Maine its own fund within the accounting system, which really would be of benefit to do this particular review. We would now be able to track it a little bit more closely than we could back in 2009. So that's the information I have for you. I believe the requesters are here if you want to hear from them about this subject.
Okay, I'd like to weigh in if I could at the beginning, because I see Representative Sirocki and Representative Timberlake out here, and I think I share their pain having served in the Appropriations Committee and being incredibly frustrated at the inability of our committee, at least, to be able to get the information we wanted on these very, very topics. And think about OPEGA, the Office of Program Evaluation and Governmental Accountability. I think we have been frustrated, and I don't think this is a partisan issue, about the inability of us to really get into the details of the accountability of how these funds are used. Fund for Healthy Maine becomes a kind of a go-to-your-corners issue for some people about how the money ought to be spent. Should it be spent for tobacco cessation, or should we transfer it and use it for Medicaid purposes? This request, as I understand, has nothing to do with that. This is just understanding how this money is spent. And I think that I was on a commission in 2011 that took a look at this. It was the most frustrating experience I've ever had in state government, trying to get to the bottom of this. I'm not blaming it on the vendors. I think at least as much of the problem lays with the department, but we as legislators, speak for myself, don't understand how this money is getting spent. And I think this is a completely appropriate subject matter for OPEGA review. Representative Campbell?
To follow up on that and recognizing the members and move it in.
On what basis?
Do we go forward with it?
Joe, if you could go back to previous
A through G.
A through G, and tell us.
We're not there yet.
I don't know what to do.
He's getting hungry.
Fast track.
Can you direct us again to which tab we're talking?
Tab J,
Tab J.
page 2. So we'll hold that handy for reference.
If you could take a look at that menu, Representative. I hate the word,
Do
the word
this.
menu, that's a bad word to use right now.
That's what they do in the office, they move it in.
Do that for the legislative calendar.
Yeah.
Senator Davis. Can I defer to Senator Davis? Senator Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, if we move this in, what would you expect that you might get to it? Before the next
Ooh, that's a
election?
really good question. I guess I would ask for the committee to indicate whether it wants to, first of all, give us some sense of priority as to where that would stand among the other reviews. I have promised to you several times now that I was going to give thought to whether or not it was time to hire some consultants to come in and do some of these reviews. There are some that are more appropriate for that in terms of their scope than others. I'm not going to say right now whether this would be one, but I mean that is still an option I have for getting some of the work done on our plan, and I have not landed on what I think about that yet, but it is something I'm mulling over. So, no problem. I could not promise. You've given me 2 priorities that would take us well into next year.
I wasn't asking for a promise, I was just asking when you might get to it.
It definitely would not be till, if the current priorities stay as they are, it would probably not be until the second half of 2016.
Well, could I suggest perhaps that the motion be, whoever wants to make it, under paragraph F, which places it on the current work plan, which means it's going to be done within the, well, it says current biennium. We could amend that to say the next biennium. And then as we talk through the priorities we have, I don't think we need to decide today what priority it is, but perhaps get it on the plans. Representative Sanderson?
Oh, sorry, just playing with that.
Oh, yeah, Representative Sirocki.
Well, I guess before if we vote to put it on, if the vote is to put it on, we're not going to decide the focus today, are we? Because I'm honestly, really uncomfortable with the fact that there was just a legislative committee that was supposed to study the allocations of the Fund for Healthy Maine and couldn't get people to show up to tell them anything about it. So I'm not inclined to fast track it over other stuff that we have going on that I think is critically important. Not that I don't think, I mean, anytime that the vendors have come to talk about what they spend their money on. I'm part of a board of a Healthy Maine Partners group in Southern Maine. So, I mean, I pretty much know what they spend their money on. I'm just want to make sure we're not going to get into something right now that somebody's going to want to fast track it for other reasons other than really let's figure out what's going on, because I think they had an opportunity, plenty of opportunity, at least begin that process before they came to us. So I know you're on a committee that tries to get that information, but if we have an administration that's not giving us the information, I mean, it's that they couldn't get people to show up.
I know that was the Health and Human Services Committee, and fortunately for us, Representative Sanderson sits on that committee and can tell us about that experience.
Well, the only thing I'll reference to the study for the allocation on the Fund for Healthy Maine that just finished up this week is we were not looking at this. Okay, we were looking at the allocations of it, the state health plan, how that money, where it should stay, should it be changed, and that's what we were looking at. We were not looking at the specific grantee management, the actual use, what portion is administration versus actual money going into the end receiver services, the clients that they serve. And, you know, what are your dependents on this, depending on the work you do? You know, how vital is this money? Is that your only source of revenue in order to be able to continue the work that you do. We did not get into that, and I will say, after the 2009 report, there was a clear recommendation that, again, this money be put into a separate account. It wasn't until the 2011 commission, which Senator Gates and I both were on, that we actually got that done. So there's still there are still a lot of things out there that need to be done. Now, one of the things that isn't clear, and we've tried to do this on a Health and Human Services level, and I don't think that we've been able to get either our point across adequately or actually had maybe the teeth to get it done, is to have a requirement on the grantee's part to make sure that this money is kept into, not put into the big pot per se. So we can have an actual indication of how that money is tracked as well, to make sure that the end services are being utilized appropriately and effectively, and making sure that we're managing them and making sure they're going to the individuals who benefit the most. So this is a completely different look at the Fund for Health in Maine from what was just concluded.
Thank you. Representative Campbell?
Yes, in the little town of Export, we've got this problem. They're very frustrated with everything that's said here. And we talked a little bit about it when I first came on the committee, but I'd like to see something happen.
Thank you. Senator Diamond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the same concerns I had on the previous issue, and there's really nothing much to do with the issue itself, although I think this information is very important to get. It's just, we're just booked up, and if the sponsors wouldn't mind coming back towards the end of the session, and so we can see where we're, a better view of where we're sitting as a committee, I'd be happy to have them do that and reconsider it. But right now, we're just loaded. I mean, our on deck is loaded, and if we're going to do anything with this, we have to move something else out. So my concern is the same as it was with the surveyors, and I'm willing to reconsider it or look at it again after the session is nearly over. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Burns?
Thank you. I have the same frustration. I've had it every time we do this, and I try to express it because we keep changing our priorities, but I certainly see this as one of the priorities, and so because of that, I'm going to ask once again, where the questions have come before us here, can we hear a few words from one of those spokespersons to see what they see their agency as?
Sure. There are three of them here. Why doesn't the best looking one come up?
That would be Jeff.
Representative Timberlake, not our first choice.
Second. Not even second.
Senior respect, Acadian. For these guys, I gotta take it personal.
Now it's time to take a break.
See ya, lunch. Just vote yes and leave. No, I think Senator Cates did a really good job of explaining where I'm at. I served my first term on appropriations last year, spent from the time I got there till the end of the session, which everybody knows went longer than we all wanted, asking on a weekly, daily basis, and Senator Cates sat beside me in my desk in the cubicle we sat in the back row, asking for the information, and they would dribble in little pieces, and they would say, so, well, the administration can get that information. Well, when you go to the administration, and I'm fairly close to the administration, I'll admit it, and they can't give me the information because when you go over there, the providers that they give the money to isn't getting the information back to them. I think that the only way we're ever going to find out where $52 million of the taxpayers' money goes is that you guys have to request this. And I don't care if you put me off to the end of the session. I don't want to come back here and testify for you. I just say that you add me to the agenda and you put me on deck. I may be ninth on deck because I was never that good a hitter anyway. If you threw me a curveball, you'd have to pick me out of the sand. So, but I'd just like to make sure this was on the agenda. It's a nonpartisan issue. I have talked to people from both sides of the aisle that are just as frustrated as I am. Representative Sirocki out there and Senator Mason all have tried to get information, and we beat our heads against the wall, and you just can't get it. You get little bits and pieces, it trickles in, but you never get to where the money's spent. And this is $52 million that comes to the state of Maine every year. It's a big chunk. It's not just a little tiny chunk. This is a big chunk of money that does a lot of good, and it goes to a lot of organizations, and I'm not saying that $1 is spent wrong, but I think we ought to know how it's spent. And we're never going to know that until we get to the bottom of that pile. And they have a lot of layers in there that you peel and you peel and you peel and you peel, and you never get there. And the only ones can do it, guys, are you ladies and gentlemen. You know, you're the only ones that can get it done. You know, DHS isn't going to supply it. The administration can't get it done. You folks are the only ones with power. And so I ask you to move it on, move me into the batter's box, put me on 9th up. You know, I don't care. But I think it's really important to the taxpayers of the state of Maine. I'd like to see it at the top of the list, but I know that's not realistic. So, you know, I'm willing to be a team player. In exchange, I'm asking you guys to be a team player. Thank you.
So Representative Timberlake wants to at least be on the practice squad. Anybody have questions? Is he going to steal second?
I am fast. I didn't get second.
Questions for Representative Timberlake? Representative Campbell?
Well, back to the batters list, I guess. How about if I float F? Place request on OPEGA's current work plan.
Second.
But do not need to begin immediately.
Any motion?
No, then.
Seconded by Representative Sanderson. Okay, there is a motion. First of all, does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Representative Timberlake before we move on to discussion? Seeing none, thank you very much, Representative. Discussion about, I have a question, and maybe if it's for Beth. When this request came in, it raised a fair amount of red flags because in the requesting letter, there was at least a passing reference to Planned Parenthood. It is my understanding that although Planned Parenthood used to get some funding from the Fund Health in Maine back in the old days, it no longer receives any funding.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so people should know that as we move ahead with the discussion. We will not be talking about Planned Parenthood. Discussion on the motion? Everybody understand the motion? All in favor, please? Yes, Representative Sirocki.
Well, it does say that means it will be reviewed within the current biennium. So what does that really mean?
Well, that really means that we haven't stuck with that very well. That is always the goal, but we always have reviews that roll over. You folks had several that rolled over when you know.
So let's just think. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to try to get it done before we were ready.
Representative Campbell?
I just think if it's on our program or within the program, it's going to get somebody's attention because there's a major problem out there. Administrative, top-heavy, a lot of things aren't getting done. It's not going, in my case, to Acadia and back to Bucksport. It's just not going. So I'd like to see at least be in the committee, so maybe we'll get somebody's attention.
I'm just going to say I'm going to be voting for it, not because I agree with Representative Timberlake. I'm not sure there's a penny being misspent. We just don't know. That's why I'll vote for it. Further discussion? Representative Sirocki?
And I'm going to vote for it too, and not because I think that things are wrong, but if I see the good that it does in my community, and I'm hoping that this will show us what a great program it has been, and that we haven't misspent this money, that it's been spent very well in the state of Maine. And compared especially to other states and how they spend their perspective.
Further discussion again, Representative Campbell.
I guess to be more specific, Bucksport has an interesting volunteer model that Acadia, who facilitates, isn't paying any attention to. They use it to secure funds, but Bucksport doesn't get any money.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the pending motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 6, 8, 9, 10. And those in opposition, 10. The vote is 10-1 in favor of Senator Diamond being a 1.
And we will give Senator Johnson an opportunity to vote.
Yes. Okay. Good. There's certain matters related to the Acadian World Congress.
Okay, so also behind tab 4, but behind the pink sheet, are the 2 letters that you, I think it was back in August or thereabouts, that we made the committee aware of these requests. One from Representative Cooper and the other from Representative Martin and Representative Saucier. You might recall that they were asking us to do a similar type of investigation or fact-finding into the matter that had been reported in the press with regard to the World Acadian Congress and the resignation of the director of that organization, purportedly or allegedly due to actions by the governor. With regard to that organization and about $500,000 in funds that it was expecting to run its program. You had at that time tabled further discussion of this request pending OPEGA issuing its report on the Goodwill Hinckley matter. So now that we are at the end of that, this is back before you. I think OPEGA has not done any research on any of this. The letters lay out pretty clearly, I think, what it is that they have for concerns and what they want looked at. So I'm happy to try to answer any questions about this.
Questions of the director? Seeing none. I believe Representative Cooper, again, consistent with what we've done today, I talked with Representative Cooper, same courtesy, and ask if she'd like to add anything to this. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. The reason I made this request was because, and specifically with respect to the World Acadian Congress, is because the facts were not known, unlike the Goodwill Hinckley situation. They were for the most part undisputed. With respect to the World Acadian Congress, we have only newspaper reports and some people backtracking on what they said. So it appeared to me that the only way to get to the bottom of what actually happened was for this body or some other body of the legislature to question the board members and other people who might be privy to the conversations that are relevant here, so that they would feel some compunction to be forthright and truthful in their responses, as opposed to avoiding questions from the press. And the reason I thought this was important was because of its similarity, at least as outlined in the press, to the allegations in the Goodwill Hinckley case, and if true, would establish a pattern of abuse that was of power that was similar, and a piece of information that would be of particular interest to the legislature.
Thank you. Questions for Representative Cooper? Seeing that, thanks very much for being here.
You're welcome.
So this request is now before us. Does someone do you have anything else you'd like to add?
You have a menu of choices.
She goes again. Changes in the last 5 minutes?
Go back to Jag.
I guess the concern I would have about potentially placing this on our work plan without OPEGA doing a little additional sort of figuring out whether there's even anything to look at. This thing is older than the Goodwill Weekly matter that we just worked on. And I have found that the office really cannot be effective in giving you any kind of good information when we don't have documentary type evidence that we can review in conjunction with interviews of individuals. And I don't know, I haven't talked with anyone who might be involved here yet to know what we might expect to have available to us were you to task us with this review. So that would be my only concern, would be for getting a better understanding of what the situation might be in terms of what we would have to look at if we were going to do an OPEGA review. I mean, I think if the idea is just to question some people about what happened, then the committee itself could choose to do an inquiry that didn't involve OPEGA setting this aside as a project. So if we were to find, for example, that really all we've got to go on is interviews with people, then I might suggest to you that a more efficient and at least as effective way to do that would be for the committee itself to just ask people to come in and talk with them. I mean, if there's something more there, then I could tell you better what our review might involve.
Thank you. Well, right now, we're not doing anything about this, right? So it would take a motion in order to change that status quo.
Well, you typically make a decision on one of these, and that's how we conclude the committee's. So you can choose to wait and talk about it further at next meeting if you want to, but ultimately I'm going to ask you to select one.
Forgot to look back at that. Representative Sanderson and then Senator Burns.
Thank you. We've just gone through quite a few months of looking into a whodunit here. A whodunit we actually had colleagues of ours involved and other folks who we work with definite actions, definite consequences. But here we're being asked to do an investigation based on a Bangor Daily News columnist's story. And I'm not sure that's the appropriate resource for which this committee should be launching an investigation. So I'm going to come right out of the box, and I am going to move that we note no further action.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Discussion, Senator Burns?
No discussion.
Oh. Discussion, Senator Diamond.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just for the record, I'm going to vote the same way as I had on the previous two. I think we're full house, and I don't think we have room to do this. So,
Further discussion on the motion. So again, the motion is to take no further action at this time. Any further discussion? Everyone understand the motion? All in favor, please so indicate. Opposed? Vote is 9-2.
3.
Excuse me, 9-3. Representative Sirocki, Representative Kruger, Representative Sherman.
8-3, right?
8-3, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Senator Johnson. We'll get an opportunity to vote.
The motion is approved, 8-3.
No.
All right, that concludes our consideration of new requests for OPEGA reviews. The next agenda item is the OPEGA report on the Office of Information Technology.